on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now,
Nick Fitz.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, May 16, 2018 day. I am so excited to be back with you all. There's been a couple of things that have changed since the last time I was on, but so excited that you've stuck around for a little bit. We've got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about the controversy that is splitting the United States of America right now. Laurel. We'll call it the Laurel controversy. We'll be talking about that, North Korea summit, and how to win young conservatives back. A phenomenal little piece but on the Weekly Standard by Ben Shapiro. We'll be talking a little bit about that as well, some religious liberty issues, because we have back, finally, the one, the only, Miss Chelsey Youman. Chelsey, how are you?
I'm good. Glad to finally be back.
Oh, it is so good to have you back. But we have to let our audience know, Chelsey, there's something different that's happening right now, right?
Yes. Some would say I'm pregnant. I say I'm large and in charge. But yes, I'm expecting.
Well, so congratulations.
Thank you.
This is so great. And this is baby number 2.
Number
right?
2.
Yeah,
2 under 2.
So Foster is going to have a playmate here
His
soon.
world's about to be turned upside down. I'm telling you right now.
Okay, that's so great.
He's been used to being the center of attention, and that will change a little bit.
And with his personality, he can be the center of attention. He is the best.
He demands it.
He's the best. So, and we're also have Kerby Anderson is here with us again, as always. Kerby,
I've been holding it down pretty good here most of the time, and it's good to have both of you back here. We have a lot to cover today, don't we?
We have quite a bit to cover. Since last time I was with you all, we had an embassy in Tel Aviv, but that's not the case anymore. So we'll be talking about what's happening relative to kind of the Israeli situation right now and some of the conflict that's happening. Also, the North Korea summit. Just even yesterday, North Korea has decided to back out, or potentially threatened to back out, rather, of the summit, and some of the implications for that relative to what does it mean to be a denuclearized state. So we'll be talking a little bit about that, and then religious liberty relative to adoption. We'll be talking about all of that and more. But before we get started, we have something significant. And so, Andrew, I'm going to need you to play the tape, because right now, here in America, we are being divided over a word. 3 years ago, I know it was just a mere 3 years ago, we had individuals that were broken, had revealed their character issues by identifying the color of a dress being gold and white, when we know it to be true that dress was blue and black. That dress was blue and black, much like
it was white and gold, guys.
Much like the Backstreet Boys album, Black and Blue. This was a black and blue dress. But now America is being deceived by individuals that are trying to be Yanni proponents. So Yanni is making his way back from the 1980s. And so there is an audio clip that has been going around the internet, and it's now gone viral, that has some people hear Yanni, some people hear Laurel. And so we're going to go ahead and play that for you right now.
Laurel, 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 Laurel.
If you did not hear Laurel, please go see your doctor immediately. Go see
It's
your
so
doctor.
obviously Laurel.
Now, he manipulated that, as I've said before, because I was in this room right next door, and you played it, and it sounded like Yammy or something like that, but that sounds exactly like Laurel. So I've been on both sides of this as a good example.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hate to be the person to say this, but Kerby is fake news right now.
Or maybe he's
and
a
almost
genius.
Everybody in that room heard the other, but it is amazing, depending on which particular register you use and what frequency you send it, you can sometimes hear one or the other, right? And let me have Andrew, who actually heard it one way, and the other way today. So he's actually, like me, been able to split and hear both of those at different times.
Chelsey, please please, can you help us?
Now,
Like,
this one
I've never-
obviously is, if anybody right now did not hear Laurel, this is almost like it's been manipulated.
You know,
You
I
could
just-
obviously hear Laurel this time.
I've never been a moderate. I really just pick a team and stick with it, and it's always been Laurel.
And so right now in studio, we have it's 3-1 because I'm assuming the child to be that Chelsea's carrying right now
He's going to go over
has
that with you.
ears to hear
Yeah.
And
can
is
hear
hearing Laurel.
Well, there's
It's
nobody
very
disagrees
clearly.
with that because that one does sound like Laurel. Nobody denies that. I don't
Well,
think.
if you heard, is it Yanni, whatever?
I've
the-
never
Yami
heard.
sort of sounds like to some people.
I haven't heard that once yet.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that once.
Maybe a caller should call in and let us know.
What we should do is change the frequency or a little bit, or the what's called the sampling rate, and I bet I could manipulate it enough so you might be able to hear it at that
Kirby and
point.
his alternative facts right
No,
now.
no,
I can't. So we would love to hear from you. Do you hear Laurel or do you hear Yanni? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can hop on over to Facebook, facebook.com/Point of View Radio, and share your comment or question with us. We'll be taking some of those online and share those over air. But Chelsey, when I've been thinking about this, I know it's all fun and games, and I get very passionate about this because I'm right and I'm passionate for the truth. But there's also this component where I think individuals are really, besides the viral, because there's things that go viral all the time, I think we're just really kind of tired of news out of the administration in Washington. It really is just kind of a refreshing break to know that things can go on outside of D.C., right?
Yes. This science cannot explain, or maybe can explain this phenomenon. But I also feel the same about the royal wedding. I mean, I would
Yes.
probably
Here we go.
nerd out about the royal wedding regardless, but it is always very refreshing to just have something kind of funny, lighthearted, or positive in the news.
It's just again. There's a book. Jonah Berger wrote this book called Contagious, and he kind of identifies 6 particular characteristics as to why things go contagious, why things go viral on the internet. And one of those components is there's an emotional resonance. And so sometimes we're naturally built to be able to go back and forth to argue one another. I would say that that's part of the characteristic of being made in God's image, that God has asked us to dialogue with him, and he dialogues with the 3 persons of the Trinity. I think there's a natural kind of connection with that. But it's just kind of fun to have something that it really doesn't mean too much, but you can get passionate about and just have a lot of fun with.
Right.
So-
Or if you're me, you're afraid that maybe geniuses hear one and I'm hearing the other.
Okay, so I agree.
What if
Okay.
we're wrong?
But look at all the answers you're already getting here
Okay.
on Facebook.
Okay, what are they saying right now? I'm confused.
Well, Stacy is saying I've heard both.
Okay.
Yanni on my phone, Laurel here.
Okay.
I have one that Stephanie is a musician. I'm used to listening to multiple vocal parts in a choir. Because of this, I can manipulate it to hear the higher and lower registers. And I think that's part of it, too. Can you hear the higher or lower registers? And then, of course, somebody's making the point, the dress is gold and white. I heard Yanni, and I've heard 5 different shows, including Point
Well,
of View.
I
So,
just now
anyway.
saw Tim's perspective, and we know that he's been discounted because he can't. His eyes are bad too because he's seeing the gold and white. In all due respect, Tim, I mean, your eyes are wrong, and then your hearing's
Can you
all-
believe
so-
how dogmatic this guy has become over something as trivial
The
as
best
this?
part is you are dead wrong about the dress. Like, you need to pick something else to take your claim on because you're colorblind.
It's so
All right.
good,
Well,
so
we're going to
good.
get to some serious stuff in a minute, but
We
you wanted to
will.
have some fun with that.
Yeah, we want
And
to-
you have that on the website today, so
Yes.
people can see that.
Yeah, if you want to go to the website,
Yes.
www.pointofview.net, you yourself can hear the news. You can hear it again. Andrew, can we hear it one more time for our audience? Can you repeat Laurel a couple more times? Okay.
Laurel. Laurel.
Yeah, that's all I hear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just
Laurel.
It's just Laurel. It's just Laurel. And so you can keep on commenting on Facebook. We'll share some of those over the air, or you can call in 800-351-1212. We'll talk about maybe that phenomenon behind it because I'm going to be very obstinate when it comes to individuals that want to proclaim the 1980s a songwriter Yanni. But nevertheless, we're going to be hopping over to more news as well. Once we come back from the break, we'll be talking about North Korea and the summit that was threatened, as well as a little bit of religious liberty. And we'll talk about a couple of those issues. We'll be taking some of your phone calls, but we got to take a break. And so we will be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Stephen Moore, economist with the Heritage Foundation, wrote an op-ed with the intriguing title, Goodbye OPEC. He argued that America was not only on the way to becoming energy independent, but also headed towards becoming energy dominant. What a change this is from a few decades ago. I grew up with environmentalists warning us that we were running out of food and energy. They were predicting future famines and a major energy crisis. It was nearly impossible to imagine any way this country would be on its way to energy independence. Stephen Moore was on my radio program to explain this remarkable turnaround. Much of it is due to the American oil shale boom, which has significantly changed drilling operations in the Permian Basin in Texas and the Bakken Shale in North Dakota. As America gets closer to becoming a net exporter of oil, that will have a positive effect on reducing our trade deficit. Obviously, Saudi Arabia is still a player in the oil business, but most of OPEC is fading away. Oil is now listed at $70 a barrel. As price increases, this can help the economy. Of course, politics is another reason why America is moving towards energy independence and even energy dominance. The previous president wanted to restrict oil exploration and fossil fuel development. The current president has a different attitude. Some have called the oil shale boom Donald Trump's revenge. The president has been willing to free up lands in places like Alaska and has allowed permits for new pipelines. All of these changes in energy policy and energy production are reasons that it may finally be time to say goodbye to OPEC. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I'm your host, Nick Pitts. Finally good to be back here. The individual that hears Laurel, actually that was the tape. Everybody's just hearing Laurel right now. And so, but nevertheless, we've been talking about the viral sensation that has kind of shook the U.S. as well as kind of the world by storm to a large degree, just the way the number of tweets that have kind of come out about it, and then just even some of the articles. It's fascinating to even see the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, all the major outlets were covering it yesterday, and it really does show just the power of kind of the populist ground-up movement now in this kind of viral world, which is just really interesting. And so obviously, Kerby, I've made kind of the argument component to the idea that I think there is just kind of it serves as a respite for us.
And we do need it some days.
Yeah.
Although there's been a lot of good news, you know, the moving of the embassy, of course, then with that, the conflict in Gaza and all the rest. So it's nice to get away from some of that for a few minutes before we get back into it.
Yeah. And so let's go ahead and get back into it. We'll jump over to North Korea right now. And so what's happening in North Korea is very interesting, is what we know. The summit is almost less than a month away, or the potential summit, I should say. And in North Korea, breaking last night, kind of threatened to a large degree that they would pull out from the summit, that they've already decided to pull out from their conversations with South Korea that was scheduled this week because of kind of this idea of what does it mean to be a denuclearized state. And so North Korea, you know, Kerby, it's been fascinating to read some of this news about how North Korea, there's some speculation that they put on the table that they were willing to get rid or stop their testing. And then other speculation based upon kind of aerial photography is that the mountain collapsed. And so it wasn't really anything that they were putting forward. It was just kind of what happened. And so I'll be interested to see what it looks like kind of moving forward because, again, there's been so little visibility into the leadership of North Korea. How is the United States going to continue to move forward in this particular realm?
Really tough because you got to recognize, as we've said from the very beginning, that this may just be a ploy used by Kim Jong-un to try to reduce some of the sanctions that are coming against him. And so when I heard that this happened, I thought, well, okay, here's the first shoe to drop. We'll see if another one drops later on. And at this point, I think if Donald Trump really is a good negotiator, he knows how this game is played. Some people say, I'm going to back away from the table. Some say, I'm going to come to the table. Some come to the table with outrageous demands. Others say, I'm going to leave the table. And he's got to be able to manage that because, indeed, North Korea is on the ropes economically for a lot of different reasons. First of all, one of the things that gives them prominence is nuclear power. But that doesn't seem to be working as well as they might have thought. They also have depended heavily upon China. China is not helping them out or bailing them out quite as much as before. And so this is a country kind of near economic collapse. And as the old guy around the table, I remember in the 1980s when we started getting reports from people saying, you know, because of this military buildup under Ronald Reagan, we think that the Soviet Union might collapse. Eventually it did. But in the process, they were trying to come up with some ways in which they could reduce the military arms of the United States or end SDI, which was the Strategic Defense Initiative. So for those of us a little bit older, it's sort of a deja vu. This is the kind of game that is played by a dictator who might be in his last leg in terms of what his country is going to do. So he's going to try as many ploys as he possibly can. And the excuse that military exercises are the reason you're going to pull back, that sounds to me like just a false excuse, trying to see if he can find something to save face before the people of North Korea.
And Chelsey, it's just very interesting just because these are, one, we have very little information on how the leadership operates in North Korea. And two, President Trump has defined himself as the modern president. He has redefined what diplomacy looks like. He has literally threatened the country of Mexico that they will pay for a wall. Okay? But then on the flip side, to a large degree, if you look at the span of President Trump's work, he's been very light on North Korea and really hasn't put a lot of expectations on this upcoming summit. When you go from Mexico, where he's saying you're going to pay for the wall, to here, kind of the most harsh rhetoric he said is that Kim Jong-un is Rocket Man. But that's just kind of a personal attack on Un, not necessarily anything relative to it. So you do kind of see that he has pulled back. He's lessened expectations for what's happening in North Korea.
Yes, I don't know if he's been talking to Dennis Rodman and has kind of the internal circle. No, but I do think that President Trump, one thing from his business world experience that definitely is transferable into his role in the presidency is the ability to negotiate, coming to the table. It's the same skill set. He's done this his entire life. And I think he's actually, it seems and appears to be a very apt negotiator. And for that reason, he probably understands Kim Jong-un more than most, which is the fact that his number one priority in North Korea is saving face. And he's really come out multiple times. The one of the actual negotiation points he said had to happen was he had to get public and international recognition as a leader.
Yeah.
He really wants to look like a strong leader. That's pretty obvious to everyone. And he wants to lead out and show that I'm a force to be reckoned with. And I think Trump understands that and doesn't want to tread too heavily and ostracize him by maybe publicly lambasting him. I think it's a smart move. But unfortunately, like we've seen every year, every single year that we've had our troops in South Korea and done these annual exercises, North Korea, sends out missiles or responds like this. And so I don't know that we can consistently count on them in negotiations as some bright line hope is on the horizon.
Yeah, Kerby, and you'll know this better than anybody. If you look at just the recent past, North Korea has not been reliable. One, when they strike up deals with us,
right,
and two, following through with deals with us. We can go all the way back to what happened in 1994 to 2000 to 2004. The past is littered with agreements where they've come to the table, but the reason why we've had to make new agreements is because they haven't lived up to their old agreements as well. So there's just a sense that there's a lot of inconsistency that's happened.
And again, I would warn of people that have been trying to say, look, this is going to be another deal that Donald Trump will bring to the fore. He was more successful with South Korea on trade than he's going to be with North Korea because they come and go. You say he has been light on him. He did say his nuclear button is bigger. Missiles are stronger. So, in a couple of places, that sounded pretty threatening, too. But it will see, because the argument from our good friends at the New York Times is this kind of bellicose rhetoric doesn't do any good. Well, for a while, it looked like it might. And this is not the kind of individual that the North Koreans have ever had to deal with before, because you've always had a Secretary of State, whether under George Herbert Walker Bush, under Bill Clinton, under George W. Bush, or under Barack Obama, who's always said, got to go be really careful here. You got to be watching what you're going to say. Don't get the sense that Mike Pompeo's one of those individuals. No. Don't think John Bolton's one of those kind of individuals. And for sure, Donald Trump is not one of those kind of individuals.
That was one of the things that they released last night. They were very harsh. The North Korean statement was very harsh on John Bolton, because John Bolton wants to have, I believe it was called the Libyan model of completely removing some of those nuclear weapons. Yep. So John Bolton he is flying, like R. Kelly, he's spreading his wings and flying right now. He is a hawk. And so what you have with John Bolton is just an individual that is similar to Donald Trump in that there's just a very brash tone, but he's got the policy chops as well, which is just very different than what we've seen.
Right. And I think it's important to understand that negotiating with communist tyrants is not the same as negotiating, a business deal or a corporate deal with someone who's like rational and at the table and we all understand each other's interests. I think that they have a very clear understanding of who they're dealing with. They've watched him for years. They've done their research. And knowing, I think that the reason they're not really amping up the outline for what the discussions are going to hold is they might not know. They're walking in there saying anything's on the table. We're hoping for the best, but they don't trust North Korea as far as they could throw him.
And I think that's one of the things that's going to take is the reason why I'm glad we have another month potentially left until this summit, because I don't think that America should be in a position where they go to the table and everything's on the table, right? Yeah. I think we've always gone to a negotiating table and said that these are the parameters by which these are the boundaries. And that was one of the biggest qualms that Republicans had when President Obama entertained the idea of going to Iran or going and engaging with Iran. So that's the last thing that I want is for President Trump and for the team to be able to go to the table and everything's on the table. Well, I think we got to register a little bit that.
One other thing I might mention that fills in kind of what Chelsey was saying as well, you have to realize you're dealing with the Asian mindset. And my Asian friends always say the issue of losing face is difficult enough in the Asian world, but when people in North Korea refer to Kim Jong-un as a god, not just as the leader, not just as the Messiah, but as a god, they got to be careful not to make him look bad in the eyes of the people of North Korea.
It doesn't even use the bathroom. I know it's kind of funny, but that's like part of the folklore.
No, part of the folklore is he was born in a unicorn cavern. I'm not kidding. That he was born among the No, it's on the website. I'll send it to you.
Charlie the unicorn. You remember that viral video? Okay, so we got to take a break. I got to go inform them about Charlie the unicorn. And you look up Charlie the unicorn on YouTube, and we will be back right after this.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, joined in studio today by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and also Kerby Anderson as well. And we have been talking about North Korea and the potential for what's going to be happening relative to the summit that should be happening here in the next month, potentially could be happening here in the next month. News broke last night that North Korea has broke off talks with South Korea. There was a scheduled talk that they had for for later this week, and then also is threatening to break off talks with the U.S., and all kind of revolves around denuclearization. And then there's some reports that are indicating that North Korea wants on the table the easement of some economic sanctions as well. And Kerby, this brings up something that's happened in the past, right? So history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
It rhymes.
To Mark Twain.
And so Abraham Lincoln.
And so what we have with North Korea right now is that in 1990 they decided to pull back. They pulled back and they asked for economic sanctions because they were going through a significant drought, and to the extent that it even caused individuals to be shorter in nature, just how malnourished they were during that time.
Yes.
And so it'll be interesting to see what are some of the parameters that are set around negotiations, one, and then two, if there is some perseverance or at least some wherewithal for North Korea to finally get to the table in a month or so. I think that'll be interesting things to watch out for.
I would think so. And again, we've posted an article here on the North Korea summit that's threatened. So again, Nick, thank you for putting that up there. And you did say something in passing I would just like to pick up on, and that is just the suffering that the people face. If you go to our website right now at pointofview.net, you'll notice that we have a video called The Korean Lights. And that has to do with something that we did a while back, where if you look at a satellite picture of North Korea at night, it's dark, except around the capital city. You look at South Korea, it's full of light. And it shows the difference not only in terms of economic poverty, but spiritual poverty, because North Korea and South Korea were essentially the same country, and yet it is so difficult to be a Christian in North Korea. Every year when we bring in people here from Open Doors, they always list the places which have the greatest persecution of Christians, and at the top of the list year after year is North Korea. The other 9, by the way, are Muslim countries. No surprise there. But it just, again, is a video to remind you of what the people in North Korea endure, and the fact that, like you said, some of them are shorter than the average height in Korea because they are malnourished. There are people still dying of starvation. There are Christians in slave camps. This is one of many reasons why it would be good to remove Kim Jong-un and to reunify Korea, not just to remove the nuclear threat, but to deal with the place where the greatest human rights abuses are taking place right now against Christians.
Yeah, and so again, like Kerby said, Open Doors USA has named North Korea the #1 persecutor. North Korea has a population of around 25 million and has around a Christian population of around 300,000. And according to Stratfor, kind of the meta-narrative, the main movement of North Korea right now is the desire, one, to be a nuclear state, and then two, the reunification of the Korean Peninsula. And so compare and contrast that, Chelsey. You've got North Korea that's suffering, their Christians are suffering significant persecution right now because of everything that's going on underneath this communist, atheistic regime, really. And then two, think about what's happening in the South right now, where it's booming with Christianity. 3 of the top 10 churches in the world are located in South Korea. I went to Southwestern Baptist Theological University, and then I kind of work over at Dallas Baptist University, and the Korean population is just staggering at both those places because there's a hunger and thirst for the truth, and these are individuals that are wanting to go back to their country and then provide hope of maybe being able to go into that country and continue to work the field that God said is ripe for harvest.
Yes, I mean, I certainly hope that their faith is bolstered by their neighbors and that they can get back and encourage one another. We know the Christian church always thrives after times of persecution. So we need to be praying for our brothers and sisters in North Korea. And I really pray that something about their lives changes for the better. Whether it's this year because of talks or whatever it might be, I do really hope for the best for our neighbors there that are really undergoing immense amount of torture and pressure from their regime.
Yeah, and Kerby, I think it brings up an interesting point if we go back to the news relative to kind of the larger cultural picture with North Korea, that just yesterday, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, decided that he was going to withdraw the hiring freeze at the State Department, which again, freeing up some of those individuals, some of those positions that have been open ever since the Trump administration took place under the former Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, that was kind of doing some organizing, not hiring, trying to slim down the State Department. Well, now Mike Pompeo has decided to unfreeze that, bring on new individuals. And it really comes at a much needed time right now when you consider everything that's going on, not only within North Korea, but then you think about the situation in Venezuela and Syria and Israel and Mexico with relative to that. There's just so many things that are going on.
Add that to Iran and whether or not we have another nuclear deal and those kinds of things. And this gets to two issues. Issue number one is we've had kind of a freeze and the need to maybe clear out the swamp. You know, they refer to the State Department as foggy bottom anyway, and so that really kind of reinforces this idea of the swamp. And there are some people in the State Department who have been there for decades who don't necessarily have the same kind of attitude as Mike Pompeo or John Bolton or certainly Donald Trump. So that's one thing. But again, then it also brings up something we talk about with Chelsey on a pretty regular basis, how difficult it is right now because the Democrats in the Senate are slow walking all of these nominations. Of course, she's talked about the judicial nominations in the federal court, but you add to that, we have a number of ambassadors that have yet to either be appointed or in some cases been appointed but have not been confirmed. And this is something that is becoming a bit of a crisis, given the fact that Donald Trump's been in office for more than a year now, right?
He's been in office for a year, and my goodness, he's a man on a mission right now to be able to put his hand and change some things, Chelsey, because that does bring up a really great point because of the lack of confirmations right now, and even to a certain extent, just the lack of appointments. Because as the businessman, there is a sense that he's trying to drain the swamp, reorganize the way that Washington works. And I mean, we even just saw, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, that the German ambassador was finally confirmed and sworn in just in enough time that when Angela Merkel came to town. And so it really, there's just this sense that because of the significant amount of work and just the sheer amount of work that's to be done, and yet we're still operating with one hand tied behind our back simply because there's just nobody there.
Right. Well, the one word for it is obstructionist. And that truly is what the left is doing, and that's part of their game plan. I hope that Americans, especially in swing states, maybe even moderates to conservative, everyone coming out to vote in November needs to hold their representatives accountable for being obstructionists within our system. We have a rule of law for a reason. We have political systems for a reason. And right now we have an entire part of our representation actively hamstringing our country. And I think they need to be held accountable for that at the polls.
I completely agree.
I just might mention that yesterday in my commentary, I talked about James Ho, and Chelsey knows who that is because he used to work at PART with some of the background work that he did for First Liberty, and he finally was confirmed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And usually when you're a rookie, you know, you kind of sit on the back bench. You don't say anything. Right out of the box, this is the opening line of his opinion in a dissent. He said, "The unfortunate trend in modern constitutional law is not only to create rights that appear nowhere in the Constitution, but also to disfavor rights expressly enumerated by our founders." Those are the kind of words that people at First Liberty and conservatives have wanted to hear for probably decades, and so that explains why the Democrats are slow walking it, because people like James Ho are going to change the court for a generation, because, you know, he's 45 years of age. He's going to be doing this for 20, 30 years, and he's a very strong, committed Christian conservative in the court, and he's there for life, at least until they put him in the Supreme Court, which I think he's going to go someday into the Supreme Court.
It will be interesting because we saw elections that happened relative to kind of the primary season that's happened even just yesterday in Pennsylvania and then in Nebraska as well. And again, this resistance movement that even though they might be obstructionists, they are gaining some bit of traction to a large degree. And yesterday, especially in Pennsylvania, there was big wins for women in yesterday's elections, but there was also big losses for moderate Democrats. And so it sees there's a movement further to the left right now. If what happened yesterday and what's happened in the past is any indication of where the country is going, or at least where the electorate is going relative to November, it's going to be very interesting this 2018 season. And so we're going to have to take one of those breaks, but know that when we come back, we're going to be taking some of your phone calls. What's your perspective relative to North Korea situation, or maybe it's just the 2018 election, where maybe you're someone that's wants to call in from a state that's is in the news relative to your Senate position or your House Representative position. We'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And you'll see a little video box right there. You go right underneath it, and then you write a really kind compliment about me, and then no, I'm just kidding. You don't have to put the question. You can just keep the compliment. No, I'm just kidding. Leave your question or comment. What you say online, we'll put over air, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The state of Florida has a new law on religious liberty. The Florida Student and School Personnel Religious Liberties Act codifies much of the case law protecting religious expression in public school. Under the new law, schools are instructed to treat voluntary student religious expression in the same way as other viewpoints being expressed. Students are given the backing of the state in their manner of religious dress, and groups of students are given the space to form student religious clubs and gather to pray like any other club. School employees benefit under the law as well. The new law expressly states, quote, employees may not be prevented from participating in religious activities on school grounds that are initiated by students at reasonable times prior to or after the school day, unquote. Finally, the law requires the Florida Department of Education to develop a model policy establishing a limited public forum at certain times for the voluntary expression of religious viewpoints by students and personnel. This provision, which is required to be adopted by each school district throughout the state, will undoubtedly provide direction for how to handle things like graduation speeches, school board meetings, and maybe even ahead of athletic contests. There's nothing earth-shattering in this new law, but whenever a state takes the time to codify what the courts have determined the First Amendment requires, it's a good thing for religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, your host for this Millennial Roundtable on this Wednesday, May 16, 2018 day. I'm joined at the roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as Kerby Anderson. And we have been talking about the elections, North Korea, because really it's very interesting to see how this thing is going to progress moving into 2018. Chelsey, it's been fascinating because if you would have asked anybody in 2017, President Trump had low approval rating, significantly low, historic low approval ratings for a first-year president, and there was very incendiary remarks that were coming out every morning on Twitter. I mean, that was just the kind of the way we were moving. But now approval numbers are going up. There seems to be some successes that are happening foreign policy-wise. Judges are getting approved. I mean, really, so the 2018 is starting to look a little bit different for Democrats as well as for Republicans.
And not to mention the economy, which has really taken off in the last almost, I guess, year and a half now. But you're right. I think Trump is really the one thing I keep hearing consistently is that he's delivering on promises. Mm-hmm. You know, moving the capital to Jerusalem of Israel. things he talked about, he's delivering on. And I think that the country should be watching and responsive to that.
Let me come to you, too, in just a minute, Nick, because I want to get your comments, because Pennsylvania maybe tells me something that I've been talking about, and we've talked about with some other roundtable guests, and that is, it does seem to me that even though it is very true in the primaries that oftentimes the Republicans go conservative and then go back to the mainstream and the middle, and liberals and Democrats go the other direction, there has been almost an assumption now that you have to hold to very liberal kinds of ideas, not only to win in the primary, but even to win in the general election, the doubling down. And I started seeing that a while back when you had some of these individuals who were probably going to run for the presidency. I know it's a little early to talk about it, but not that early. Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, and others taking stands that only Bernie Sanders would take in terms of a single payer, in terms of guaranteed income or guaranteed job for everyone. Yes, you expect maybe Elizabeth Warren to take that stand. Yes, you maybe expect, obviously, Bernie Sanders to take that stand. But now you have, for example, this idea of a single-payer plan. 17 U.S. senators signing on for that? Now this idea of a guaranteed job for everyone? That sounds like socialism. And then the other day, Hillary Clinton said, she has another reason why she lost. Chelsey, you'll love this one. And that is when you go to Iowa and so many Democrats are socialist and you say you're a capitalist, that's another reason why I lost. This is reason number 417, I think. But nevertheless.
I thought she'd give up on giving reasons by now.
But you're hearing more and more of this idea that instead of Democrats saying, we've lost all these state houses, we've lost all these governor races, we lost the presidency. Oh, I know. Let's double down and become even more liberal. That doesn't look well for the 2018 midterms. What are your thoughts?
Well, see, Chelsey, let's just go ahead and get controversial because I'll be the devil's advocate here. Yeah, the Democrats might be going super liberal, but I'll just Roy Moore,
that was a disaster.
Blankenship potentially.
Fortunately lost.
Fortunately lost. Yeah. So you're saying the Democrats might be going more liberal. The Republicans have got to put up better candidates, right?
Well, I want the Republicans to put up amazing, stellar, credible candidates. Yes. The
swamp
tend
captain?
to focus more. I know. Okay. We can't go there again. I kind of want to relive that. But the truth is you forget that this is all about voter turnout.
Yeah.
And so you've got to remember who are the people going to the polls during midterms. It's not going to be young millennials.
Mm-mm.
It's not going to be whatever the next generation, Generation X, the next generation. It is going to be older, consistent voters, probably people who follow politics a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And I think that bodes well for the conservatives.
So, but again, for the liberals, to make your case, let me make it one more case because, you like to do that. Maybe that works better because politics isn't so much about numbers, it's about intensity. Mm-hmm. And if I, ring every one of the liberal bells, then all these individuals who have been sitting on their hands say, okay, I don't like Donald Trump and I don't like the direction of the country and I'm going to put up signs and I'm going to make phone calls. So maybe that's why they're becoming more liberal. But it is amazing to me, something I never thought I would see. So many candidates now, especially running for the presidency, but sometimes even for these midterm elections, taking some stands which 2 or 3 years ago you wouldn't even hear Barack Obama taking a stand like that.
This is where I think it's going to be really interesting if we just focus specifically on younger voters, because right now we're seeing just this this huge boom in political interest among younger people, specifically because of galvanizing personalities. So on the left, you have the John Favreau's, Pod Save America, that whole crew. And they're like one of the largest podcasts in the country. And when they do their tours, all these people. Now, again, I know the numbers. Just because you're willing to go to a podcast show doesn't mean you're willing to show up at the ballot box. Like, I know those numbers.
They're just going to tweet about it.
We'll
never see them.
I know that. But the same argument can be said for the conservatives as well, right? Because Ben Shapiro, wherever he goes, he makes sure that we know that there's a big crowd, there's seats that are sold out, et cetera, et cetera. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're actually going to vote. Just because you're willing to go to a show that's entertaining doesn't necessarily mean you're willing to go to vote. But what we're seeing, though, for both of these entities is their power is increasing, their presence is increasing, and what they do with that, does it, one, just turn on and create more people to watch, or two, are they able to actually mobilize these individuals to the polls?
Well, I think on the left, it's really about echo chambers to me when I look at this. I think the reason they're going further and further left, I mean, there was a video I saw where The platform for the Democrat Party and Marxism is literally indistinguishable. And they took polls on the street of average people who said they were Democrats, usually young people, say they're liberal, and they could not distinguish between the two. I think that's been happening for years. I think that happened before the last election. They're in their own echo chamber, listening to themselves and just continuing to polarize. Really, politically, our entire country is very polarized. But this is going to be about driving forces. What is going to get people motivated and excited to get out to the polls? And for all of our listeners, we want you out at the polls voting for Republicans because we do need judicial nominees to get pushed through. And I do think that, yes, some are getting sworn in, but there are literally dozens on the back burners just sitting there waiting. One of my colleagues included, who would be an excellent constitutional judge that we need on our courts, that's actively being obstructed. So yes, Trump has done a ton in the last few years, been a lot of wins, a lot of successes. The economy, is going in the right direction, but there's still a lot more we need to accomplish, and we can only do that with majority of House and Senate.
I think it's going to be very interesting because if you look at the House is one. If you would have looked at the House last year, it would have been a foregone conclusion that thing is going to go. It's going to switch parties, and you're going to have Nancy Pelosi being the speaker yet again for all intents and purposes. But now we're starting to see that there potentially could be some glimmers. There's a chance. And the Senate has, again, been one of those stalwarts. But then you have individuals like Phil Bredesen out of Tennessee, who's the senatorial candidate, very highly favorable governor, as well as highly favorable mayor, who's on the left, but has played to that moderate side. And even now during his campaigns, because just being from Tennessee, familiar with that campaign, he's continued to stay largely in the center and play towards what he does really well, which is just business and healthcare and education specifically. So it's going to be very interesting because, again, it's not just talking about it, it's being about it. And the way you be about it in the American system is not only by being a good neighbor and voting, but it's by bringing your neighbors to vote as well. And so I think that'll be interesting. So all that to say, we've got to take a break, but we would love to hear from you. You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. What are your sentiments? What are you thinking about when you think about this midterm election? Maybe what's the biggest issue for you? Or maybe what do you think is kind of some of the inhibiting factors that's causing individuals not to go out to the polls? I've got my theories. I'll share them with you after the break. Or you can jump over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And if you go to facebook.com, you'll see the live video, and then right underneath the live video, there'll be a comment or question that you can just leave right there. And what you share online, we'll share over the air as well. But we're going to take a break. But when we come back, we'll be talking more about the midterm 2018 election, as well as just some of the things that are inhibiting millennials, but also causing millennials to jump to the polls.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary
because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I am your host for this Millennial Roundtable on Wednesday, May 16, 2018. I am Nick Pitts. So glad to be back with you all. I'm joined in studio at the Roundtable by Kerby Anderson as well as Chelsey Youman. Chelsey, how are you?
I am good. I'm well.
You look extra well today.
Am I glowing?
You are glowing. Why in the world would you be glowing, Chelsey?
Because I'm pregnant.
I wish we had a clap thing. Yes. Congratulations.
Expecting in October.
Oh, so great. So great. Well, we are so excited for you,
Thank
and we
you.
are so excited that you have decided to join us today on the Point of View radio show. We just were in the Dallas market for the previous hour, and we talked about everything from the midterm elections to North Korea to probably the most tenuous thing here that's rocking the world right now relative to Team Yanni or Team Laurel. And so it boils down very simply. If you are hearing Yanni on this track that has now gone viral, please turn off your radio, contact your doctor immediately. You have potentially here. No, I'm just kidding. So there's the audio track.
People are going to start calling doctors.
And so there's the audio track that has gone since viral, and where some people are claiming to hear Yanni, some people are claiming to hear Laurel. As for me in my house, we hear Laurel, but nevertheless, it's neither here nor there. We'll be playing that here later on during the hour, but we've also got a pretty packed show for you today. There's a couple of things that are going on relative to the North Korea summit that was threatened. We talked about that a little bit during the first hour. We'll get to that later on and retouch on some of that, as well as how to win young conservatives back. There was a thoughtful piece that was put out by Ben Shapiro in the Weekly Standard that we'll be talking about, as well as some religious liberty issues, since we've got Chelsey here, and she is the one that is the expert on religious liberty here at the Roundtable. We'll be kind of talking with her about some updates that's happening around the country today, but we've also are coming out of an election day that happened just yesterday. And so during the first hour, we were talking about how specifically it was in Nebraska as well as in Pennsylvania yesterday. What you saw relative to some of the midterm primary elections is you saw pretty significant wins for women in those elections, but also pretty significant losses for moderate Democrats in those as well. And so we were speculating and wondering, are we starting to see the Democrats continue to go further left, more towards the Bernie Sanders, more towards the Elizabeth Warren type, and what's happening relative to, you would say, the conservative movement? Are these candidates going to continue to drift further right, or is there more moderate positions? Are they rhinos? Are they Republican? Are they Trump? Are they running closer to Trump? Are they running further away from Trump? And so there's an aboundingness of questions that are begged to be asked, and so we want to hear from you as well. So we'll be opening up the phone lines, 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And we've also got on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You can leave a question or comment on there. And so if you're watching right now, hello, and you go right underneath there and you leave like a little comment or question or compliment. I take compliments, but there's not much to compliment. And you can leave a question or comment, and what you share online, we'll share over air as well. And so, Chelsey, we were talking about this during the first hour. There really is. There's just some problems that seem to be looming relative to the kind of the Republican movement. I guess probably the most significant, question that has to be asked relative to Republicans is, do you run closer to President Trump? Do you run further away from President Trump? And then the questions on Democrats is, how far left are you going to go? So it's just a lot of questions right now.
There are a lot of questions. I don't have all the answers, but I do think that a lot of it's going to depend. Some of it's regional as well, right? So in the state of Texas, it's always more in line with, I think, the general opinions to run for the right.
Yeah.
So here it's going to be different than it's going to be in more of a swing state or somewhere else. But I'm not sure if it's like a cart before the horse kind of thing to say that just now the liberals are starting to go further and further left. I think they've always lived in their own echo chamber, that we've seen that in the last election where the platform between the Democrat platform and the Marxist platform are indistinguishable. I saw a video on this where Democrats, self-proclaimed Democrats, could not tell the difference between the communist platform and the Democratic Party platform. Wow. So this has been ongoing for a long time. I think that's one of the reasons we saw Hillary Clinton pander so far to the left. Mm-hmm. It's because I think even then she probably had an understanding that the base truly is becoming more and more polarized from center.
Yeah, so Kerby, but let's look at a specific race, for example. So Chelsey brought up the point that it seems as though, here in Texas, you've got to go to the right. But man, that Quinnipiac poll that was put out 2 or 3 weeks ago relative to Beto O'Rourke and then Ted Cruz was only up by 3 points. Now, granted, that Quinnipiac poll, there was a number of questions relative to it. That was the first time that they had ever put out a poll here in the Texas area. But again, it's very interesting to see what's going to happen in 2018 right now.
Well, and again, that illustrates the fact that you had a close election. In close elections, you see all sorts of things surface that don't when it's an easy runaway kind of election. I want to hear from some of our listeners in Nebraska and Pennsylvania to tell us if they are familiar with that, whether that was simply because the moderate Democrats were losing or whether there were some other factors. But what I think is so striking is there was a time not so long ago in which you had a lot of moderate Democrats. And I think what is happening, especially in these midterm elections, is recognize that lots of people turn out for a presidential election. Fewer people turn out for a midterm election. Even fewer people turn out for the primaries of a midterm election. And if you'd like to read a little bit more about that, one of the booklets we make available to people is Make Your Vote Count. And I talk about how in the primaries in a midterm election, your vote counts like 20 times as much as it would, say, in a presidential election. Well, think about who's going to turn out in Pennsylvania, Nebraska. Of course, we just mentioned Texas just a minute ago, or wherever you happen to be listening right now. It's going to be those people that already are really convinced about an issue. And those people that are convinced about an issue are going to be primarily conservative Republicans and very liberal Democrats. So some of the phenomenon that we used to be a Scoop Jackson, who was a moderate Democrat. There used to be a Nelson Rockefeller, who was sort of a moderate Republican. Those sort of have disappeared. They're kind of like endangered species. And now you're having people moving more and more to the extremes, especially in some of the primaries and midterm elections.
That brings up a great point, Chelsey, because you think about the type of voter that's going to come out during a midterm election. Then you consider a couple of we'll consider a couple of just sample elections right now in the Senate. You got Joe Manchin, that is a Democrat, but has been pretty moderate, you would say, because he was pretty close to Trump, and he faces a pretty tough election relative to Patrick Morrisey in West Virginia. And then you got Phil Bredesen, that's running in Senate right now, and he's got a pretty tough election because he's got Marsha Blackburn, who's got very much a national figure, especially among a pro-life audience. So it really is. Who's the type of voter that's going to come out during the midterm?
I think it's going to be hardline party voters, people who care, they're following the news, they're in touch with their own parties, with their own platforms. They're more knowledgeable maybe than the voters who just show up for the presidential election because it's a big race, So especially at the primary phase, those are really motivated voters. But when it comes to the general, it's going to be a smaller subset of the population that just is going to vote in a midterm. And so either highly motivated or highly involved and they care, which is great for our side. So all of our listeners need to go out and vote and make sure you're voting against any obstructionist Democrats that are in the House or Senate who are blocking, Trump's ability to do his job, right? And blocking executive appointments and judicial appointments.
And so we're going to have to take a break, but when we come back, we're going to continue to talk about maybe some of the strategies that's happening on both sides of the aisle. So relative to Democrats, are they running further to the left? Relative to Republicans, are they running closer to Trump? We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Stephen Moore, economist with the Heritage Foundation, wrote an op-ed with the intriguing title, Goodbye OPEC. He argued that America was not only on the way to becoming energy independent, but also headed towards becoming energy dominant. What a change this is from a few decades ago. I grew up with environmentalists warning us that we were running out of food and energy. They were predicting future famines and a major energy crisis. It was nearly impossible to imagine any way this country would be on its way to energy independence. Stephen Moore was on my radio program to explain this remarkable turnaround. Much of it is due to the American oil shale boom, which has significantly changed drilling operations in the Permian Basin in Texas and the Bakken Shale in North Dakota. As America gets closer to becoming a net exporter of oil, that will have a positive effect on reducing our trade deficit. Obviously, Saudi Arabia is still a player in the oil business, but most of OPEC is fading away. Oil is now listed at $70 a barrel. As price increases, this can help the economy. Of course, politics is another reason why America is moving towards energy independence and even energy dominance. The previous president wanted to restrict oil exploration and fossil fuel development. The current president has a different attitude. Some have called the oil shale boom Donald Trump's revenge. The president has been willing to free up lands in places like Alaska and has allowed permits for new pipelines. All of these changes in energy policy and energy production are reasons that it may finally be time to say goodbye to OPEC. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I'm your host, Nick Pitts, joined at the roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and Kerby Anderson, and we have been talking about the upcoming 2018 elections. And so if you were listening with us during the first hour, one of the things that you'll continue to hear from Chelsey is this refrain relative to resistance, obstructionist, because I would dare say, I'm just going to speculate here, Chelsey, that might be your issue, that you're really passionate about.
I get fired up about this because when you take a look, there's 147 judicial vacancies right now, which is astronomical. So just so you guys know, there's a shortage of judges available to hear an immense amount of cases. There are some, it's a huge drought in the judicial system right now, a need that needs to be met for our country. And there are over 50 nominated now, and it would take 13 years of debate now, 13 years to get all those vacancies filled because Democrats are invoking the 30-hour rule for every single nominee. They are slow walking the nominees. And, we're using the word obstructionist in our office because it's really, it's hamstringing the federal system and the judiciary system. And the problem is they don't have legitimate qualms necessarily with the nominees. They're even doing this to nominees who Obama put up that they had previously approved, who'd previously had their blue slips. So at this point, the Democrats are truly they're just trying to slow the judicial system down.
Wow. And so, again, that brings up kind of an interesting point that we were talking about, Kerby, right before we went to the break. And I'd be interested to hear from our listeners out there. Or if you want to vote for us, you can vote for us by dialing *6. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. So it moves towards the strategies for both parties, right? Moving into the 2018 election. It would appear as though in 2017, Republicans would be very cautious to want to cozy up too close to the president just because of his approval ratings. But even just in the past month, his approval ratings have continued to go up. We've seen significant job growth right now. We've seen significant economic growth. We've seen some successes on relative to the appointment of justices. And even though there's been a lot of delay, there's a lot of wins for him, and potentially could be cozying up to him might not be the worst thing that they could do.
And again, a lot of it, I think, has to do with their particular race. Let's say you're a member of Congress and your particular district voted pretty significantly for Donald Trump in the election. You've seen job growth, and you see a lot of people in the community seem really positive about what's taking place. You become a clone of Donald Trump. Let's instead take you to the corners of the country. We'll use the West Coast or the East Coast, in which Donald Trump is a name that you don't want to mention too often, and you sort of just play Mission Impossible. You know, I have no value. I do not value or even understand, and will even disavow any kind of comment made by the president. So, I mean, a lot of it depends on that. But back to the point you made a minute ago, Nick, I think that's really a telling story that this time last year, if you had predicted the midterm elections, I think you and I both would have predicted that the historical trend, and that is the party that's outside of the White House usually gains as many as 25 seats. You and I might have said it could have been 50 seats.
Yeah.
Now we're saying maybe it'll be a dozen or 2 dozen or 3 dozen, but it's not going to be anything like the watershed we would have thought a year ago.
Yeah, and again, so much can change right now. You think about what just happened in North Korea, for example. Everything seems to be changing day by day, moment by moment. You think about the tariff situation. Eventually, this tariff situation and the trade war, and then President Trump's comments relative to trying to help out ZTE, which is just
there's another one. Yeah.
Entity that's been spying on us and stealing intellectual property. But that's beside the point. There's just so many factors right now that are going into this election that it's going to be extremely interesting, and it really does, in a non-shocking twist, revolves a lot around the leader of the party, or the party that's in control, President Trump.
Of course it does. I mean, absolutely. And I think we always have to get back to who is showing up at the polls during the midterm elections. Are people who are usually there with a purpose. You're either there voting against someone. We saw a lot of that in the last election as well, or you're there because you're really solid in your platform. You know your issues. And I think that the news, actually, I have a theory that the more negativity that they spend years amping up against Trump, the more immune conservatives really become to it. I mean, we've heard it all. We've heard all the criticism. We've heard all the scandals. We've heard all the terrible theories and conspiracy theories against him. And at some point, that really loses its value to a voter. And at some point, voters end up tuning that out. So I think conservatives are there during midterms to either vote for wanting to maintain the status quo they're seeing and these things they're liking in their own representatives, or to hopefully gain some more seats.
So I'd be really interested to hear, Chelsey, because you brought up a really great point, and I want to press you on this. Okay, so we go back to the 2016 election. 2016 election really was driven by people voting against a particular person, namely Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, in a shocking twist, is not on the ballot. I know the ghost of Hillary Clinton still haunts too many conversations, but she is not on. She is not on the ballot in 2018. And so now you have many Democrats, as they've demonstrated throughout, that are in elected office right now, have demonstrated this resistance of wanting to try to limit President Trump. Is that going to be enough of a quote-unquote record hindering him to cause individuals to come out and vote against him? Or do you think Republicans are there's going to be a sizable swing of Republicans that are going to come out in the midterms saying we need to bring more of our people, put them in office?
Well, I obviously hope that it's the latter. And I also think that it's going to depend location where you are. If you're in a swing state, conservatives need to show up and they need to know what's at stake, because really there's just an opportunity here with the majority House and majority Senate to keep getting things accomplished and to keep getting these measures passed. And so, showing up with a motive, I think, is really, really important when you're going to midterms.
One of the questions I want to ask both of you as we do our Millennial Roundtable, and we recognize that especially in a midterm election where you're trying to differentiate two individuals, sometimes that are not well known, you get a high level of negative ads. I get the sense that millennial voters who already are not registered to vote, considering previous generations, and then easily turned off by conflict, do you think that that will have an impact? Because you're going to just see a lot of negative. I'll prepare our listeners right now. You're going to see negative ads like you've never seen before, I suspect, this time.
Oh, my goodness, yeah. And I think that alludes to the piece that's on our website at pointofview.net. That'll be the second piece that we talk about, that Ben Shapiro piece that he put out in the Weekly Standard. Because I think the research is pretty clear that millennials still see politics as an extension of their identity. They still very much believe in it. And I think one of the things that Ben Shapiro does really well in that article is he kind of distinguishes between younger conservatives and older conservatives, how older conservatives live through the character counts, but it doesn't necessarily count relative to Clinton. So they forsook character when it came, and hence the reason why Donald Trump, which, I mean, that's just truth. I mean, thrice married, and then you've got the porn star thing that's going on. That's not speculative theory, and so character doesn't count. It's results that count. Relative to millennial voters, though, millennial voters still think character counts. Hence the reason why President Trump doesn't have as high among conservatives, does not have as high favorability rating. So I still think with millennials, you need to appeal to that character component if you're really trying to get them to get out to vote.
Right. I can't wait to talk about that article. I thought it was just some really, really good analysis of kind of our side of the party on the conservative side, and drew some clear lines there to help everyone understand what we're looking at. But I just don't see millennials coming out in November. I just don't. I don't know what it would take, but young voters just typically have lower turnout in general, and then you give it a midterm, and I don't see that we should obviously focus on them and hoping people show up, but this is really going to be about party lines.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting just because there's, again, if we look back at 2016, 1 in 5, 1 in 4, 1 in 5, 20 to 25%, some say 22% of millennial voters actually voted. Even though they were the largest age demographic in the electorate, they just did not show up to vote, which is other age demographics, it was upwards of 40 to 42%. So just very different when it came to millennial turnout. It will be interesting as they get older. Typically, individuals start going to the polls, and this millennial demographic is getting older to a large degree. And so will they end up coming out? And do they have an impetus to come out, too? I think that was one of the things that was so interesting and was lacking in 2016. There was no impetus to come out. It was a voting against people. And it's the reason why no one wants to come out to that. So I'll be very interested. So all that to say, we're going to have to jump to commercial break. And so when we come back from commercial break, we'll continue to talk about the 2018 election. We'd love to hear your comments or your questions that you have relative to millennial voters or simply just the 2018 election. We'll be taking some of your phone calls at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Maria, thanks for watching on Facebook. You can also leave a comment or question on Facebook, www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be taking some of your questions or comments that you leave on the Facebook page, and what you leave online we'll share over the air as well. And when we get back, we're going to jump into that Ben Shapiro piece because I think it's a very fascinating piece. That's on our website at pointofview.net. The Ben Shapiro piece really does delineate between older and younger conservatives and what older conservatives can do to win back younger conservatives. Because again, whereas older conservatives typically have been very kind of sold out on that character issue, it doesn't matter, younger conservatives still believe that it matters. And so we'll talk about that and more when we get back right after this.
Imagine you work where you know people do not share your faith, and they certainly don't agree with a Christian view of life and culture. You are surrounded by hostility every single day. How important would it be to have solid information to back you up? Jim in South Carolina listens to Point of View in the afternoons. He writes, I teach in a public secular university and enjoy actually being a voice for the biblical Christian worldview in a liberal setting. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for being bold and proclaiming truth. And Jim finishes, I pray for you daily. Jim works in hostile territory, and he prays for Point of View because Point of View is a source of truth. Please help us continue being here for Jim and everyone else. We need you to visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151 and join the Truth Team. Enable us to be here each day by giving each month. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, joined today at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as Kerby Anderson. And we have been talking about the 2018 upcoming midterm elections, where you have both, obviously, Democrats and Republicans. And so they're trying to figure out, relative to they move for Republicans, do they move closer to President Trump and continue to run alongside him, or try to distance themselves from him. And then you've also got the Democrat side. Do you try to play that moderate card that certain individuals like Joe Manchin, as well as potentially Phil Bredesen, who's running in Tennessee, for example, do you play that, or do you move further and further to the left, to the Bernie Sanders crowd, to the Elizabeth Warren crowd? And so it's very interesting. And so we were alluding to taking some phone calls, as well as trying to figure out for a younger audience what that looks like. And so we were talking about the significance of character for younger audiences. And so we are taking your phone calls. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and you can leave a question or comment right underneath there. And then we'll share what you put online over air, as long as it's appropriate. I'm the only one that can be mildly inappropriate on the show. And so we're going to jump on over to a phone call right now. We've got Bob on the line. Bob, are you there?
Hi, yes. Thank you so much, panel. I'm going to go out on a limb here and make a correlation that might not be easy for some people to grip. But King David of the Old Testament had foibles as far as Bathsheba and his ruthlessness with Uriah. And he was a man after God's own heart. And we're all works in progress. And I kind of see the big picture as far as what President Trump is doing may just well be a man after God's own heart, even though he has his limitations. And I'll just leave that there.
Thank you so much, Bob. Yeah, we've heard the biblical illustrations that have been used to try to compare President Trump with a couple of people. You've had the King Cyrus argument. What Bob illuminated is kind of the King David, and not to say that President Trump is King David, but does see some allusions relative to King David was a man after God's own heart, but also a man that really did kind of fall short a number of times. You see that he was a guy that killed tens of thousands, is what they would chant, compared to Saul, who just killed thousands. Relative to David, he was someone that some say he had sexual relations with Bathsheba. Others would go so far as to say that he raped Bathsheba. He killed Uriah. And so there was a brokenness to King David, but yet God used King David and even described him as a man after God's own heart. And so with President Trump, he's just got the character issues. And so there's been other individuals. Brad Todd just came out with a new book. Brad Todd and Selena Zito have a book out that talks about the King Cyrus argument, that God can even use it like a King Cyrus. And so there's been no shortage of biblical illustrations and comparisons for President Trump.
No, and I think it's important to recognize that in the best of all worlds, you'd like to have people of character that have a good voting record. And the two examples that you've been using, I think, are interesting. The Senate race in West Virginia and the Senate race in Tennessee. Let's be fair. We may prefer one candidate over the other, but these are two, in both cases, races where you have quality people on both sides. We wish we had more of those, where then we're just assuming that they have good character, and then we go to their voting record. That isn't always the case, you know, and so that's something that people have had to sort out, and we've talked about that with the Senate race in Alabama. We almost talked about it in the Senate race in West Virginia, and some of these others. So it's going to be something that Christians are going to have to think through carefully. But at the same time, let's, if we can, as I've said so many times in this program, try to get the right people in the primaries. Because when people complain, Nick, in November about their choices in November, that's because they weren't involved in March through June in some of those primaries. Yep. And that's why I think you need to pay attention right now. Many of you are in the particular listening audience where you've already had your primaries. We just talked about Nebraska and Pennsylvania. Some of you are in states that have yet to have your primaries, and I think you really need to pay attention to some of those individuals so that you won't having to make those difficult situations. Can God use people of bad character to bring about good laws? Well, of course. Historically, through American history, that's happened time and time again. Those aren't our first choice, but they still ultimately are making policies that can either affect our family in a positive way or in a negative way.
Yeah, I think that brings up a good segue, Chelsey, and I'd be interested to know, does character still count? And so based on polls, it appears as though millennials still very much character values, we'll just say, because they're not religious. Millennials aren't largely religious. We're one of the largest demographics to represent religious nuns, and so we're largely not participating. It's even interesting. Some of the research is very clear that among the spiritual disciplines, we are decreasing based upon previous generations. We pray less, we go to church less, we give less. The only thing that's going up is our belief that we're going to heaven, which is just very interesting to say the least. But we still do care about character to the extent that President Trump, conservatives that were millennials, did not come behind President Trump in his strongest numbers. And so there's just that sense that character was illuminated there, or lack thereof. You've got candidates like Roy Moore out of Alabama that questions were raised about his character, and we saw conservative millennials flock away from him. And then Blankenship was just another individual that had some character issues. So I'd be interested to hear your take on millennials and the quality of character. Is it still important in the electorate?
Sure. I thought the Ben Shapiro article was one that I wish I'd read a year ago. I mean, it was so insightful. It just drew some really clear lines. So I encourage every listener out there to go pull the article from pointofview.net and just go look at it. But, at first I thought we've got to distinguish here because, again, as you mentioned, young millennials are not religious. And so they're not necessarily voting out of religious motivation. And even, Christian conservatives who are millennials are still really not conservative on certain social issues you would think they would be, with the exception of being pro-life and pro-gun. Conservative millennials, typically they're more libertarian. And so they just think the government needs to stay out of the social issues, which I actually think is disconcerting. I think we've got to care enough about our brothers and sisters to care about some of the social issues too. I think they're foundational to our country. We can get on that later. But the character question is not one that is a religious one. I think there's other reasons that it matters to millennials beyond, is what he's doing, quote unquote, moral or immoral, and why? I think the questions come back to millennials who are conservative are in the far minority. I mean, we are surrounded 10-1 by liberal peers. And so we are out there having discussions with other millennials who are liberal, trying to be persuasive on our issues and trying to fight the good fight and bring people to the conservative movement and have these discussions in a way that's credible, that's intellectual and intellectually honest. And it's really hard to do that for young millennials when their representative seems incredible sometimes and seems, he's not always a good conservative, even on the pro-life issue in the past or historically. And so it's hard to enter in those discussions when you're immediately starting on the defense of someone's character and all the bravado or things they've said that we might not disagree with, but now we've got to go defend those instead of the issues we actually care about.
Because it's still important, Kerby. And again, this character issue is not a partisan issue. We want civility to be something that's a defining characteristic of both sides. And so this isn't just simply a conservative case for millennials. This is largely a millennial thing, that character still does matter. Treating people well still does matter. I mean, that's one of the top things that they look for when joining a church, if they're Christian in nature. And just even if they're not joining, they want to be surrounded by kind, good people, right?
Oh, I think so. The piece that we are talking about by Ben Shapiro has the title, How Conservatives Can Win Back Young Americans. Now, the argument he makes is one that we try to make here as well, and that is you've got to get the facts out. You've got to get the information out. It is interesting that Ben Shapiro is writing this because isn't he a little bit inflammatory? Yeah, okay. So if I could change the illustration, we've had Foster Freeze here. We've had a number of others that have talked about this idea of civility. So I think if you can make your arguments and do it in a winsome way, that's going to win over not only millennials, but a lot of other individuals. And I make kind of this illustration, since we're coming to break, I'll make it real quick. It's almost like you got liberals on one side and conservatives on the other, and it's kind of like they're shooting missiles at each other back and forth. And the mass of America is in the middle just watching these various missiles go over their head. Planned Parenthood says all sorts of awful things about anti-choice individuals. Pro-life people talk about them having abortion mills and they're murderers. And there's a lot of people in the middle that are going, okay, I have some uneasy about abortion, but I have trouble wanting to go to either side because they sort of have done so much to turn me off. And you take that issue on the transgender issue, take that issue on climate change, whatever it might be. The mass of Americans, I think, are just looking for somebody who is gracious, who can use some logical arguments. And that is so, in some respects, Ben Shapiro has half of it, but you're talking about the other half that I think needs to be added to it as well.
And it's not sacrificing, it's not sacrificing truth. It's not sacrificing winning for the sake of just being gracious. We're not telling individuals to roll over. That's what Henry Kissinger said. It might be gooey, it might be mushy, but at the end of the day, it's true. Right? It's just true. This is, especially from a Christian standpoint, we're to be above reproach. We're not allow our enemies to be able to see something negative against us. We're going to have to go to a break. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The state of Florida has a new law on religious liberty. The Florida Student and School Personnel Religious Liberties Act codifies much of the case law protecting religious expression in public school. Under the new law, schools are instructed to treat voluntary student religious expression in the same way as other viewpoints being expressed. Students are given the backing of the state in their manner of religious dress, and groups of students are given the space to form student religious clubs and gather to pray like any other club. School employees benefit under the law as well. The new law expressly states, quote, employees may not be prevented from participating in religious activities on school grounds that are initiated by students at reasonable times prior to or after the school day, unquote. Finally, the law requires the Florida Department of Education to develop a model policy establishing a limited public forum at certain times for the voluntary expression of religious viewpoints by students and personnel. This provision, which is required to be adopted by each school district throughout the state, will undoubtedly provide direction for how to handle things like graduation speeches, school board meetings, and maybe even ahead of athletic contests. There's nothing earth-shattering in this new law, but whenever a state takes the time to codify what the courts have determined the First Amendment requires, it's a good thing for religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I'm your host, Nick Pitts, and I'm joined in the studio by Kerby Anderson as well as Chelsey Youman, and we've been talking about the role of character in the upcoming 2018 election, and really just Kerby was using the analogy that the majority of us find ourselves located within the middle, and bombs are lobbed from left to right over one another. And it's frustrating because, again, kind of operating underneath the assumption of a Jonathan Haidt that continues to say that we're a tribal people by nature. And so I'd be really interested just to continue to see this. And I think this was most illuminated for me, the tribal nature of us relative to the character issue stems all the way back to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I think it's the most recent illumination. So at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, you've got Michelle Wolf. That just is atrocious, some of the jokes that she made. I think we can all agree that the jokes she made against Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's the press secretary, were just uncalled for. They were personal. They were mean-spirited. They just should not have been done. And I think it was right for individuals to be very frustrated by that, to call her out on that. I think she went way too far. And one of the couples that kind of illuminated that went way too far, that said enough is enough, is the Schlapps. And so you've got Matt Schlapp, who's head over the CPAC, as well as his wife, Mercedes. And Mercedes and Matt walked out of the White House Correspondents' Center, and they made a big hubbub about walking out. And then they decided to go to the after party afterwards. Okay? And so fast forward a week, and then you have comments that came out. Kelly Sadler says, McCain doesn't matter anyway. He's going to die soon. Happens in the White House. It got leaked. Apparently Kelly called McCain and said, I was sorry for that comment, and said she would offer a public apology. Has yet to offer the apology yet. We're just operating underneath the assumption that she said that comment. Again, that comment is uncalled for. It's unnecessary. It's wrong. Well, Mercedes Schlapp has now come down and doubled down and says that she stands beside Kelly Sadler. And again, this is just blatant hypocrisy on both sides. Like, it's just so frustrating. As a millennial, I am increasingly frustrated by both sides, the lack of civility, just the lack of class and tact these individuals have. They're rising to the top. They're at the very tops of their field, but yet they can't. It reminds me of John Adams. If you can't control your mouth, go sit at the kids' table kind of deal. I'm just so frustrated by it, Chelsey.
Well,
I'm sorry. I'm just going to pass it off on you right now.
No, I mean, I agree. I wish we could rise above it. I said on the break, I don't want to be talking about Stormy Daniels. I want to be talking about policy, right? Like, these things are sideshows. You cannot talk about a death wish for one of our longstanding senators. I don't care if he's a Democrat. Like, you don't say stuff like that. And I think that, with the rise of, in some ways, being not politically correct is good. I think that's one of the things Trump brings to the table, is just how stifled the Republican parties and conservatives have felt over 8 years. We forget, under Obama, where you couldn't say anything. Everything was, had to be so politically correct or you'd get slammed. We've really swung the other direction, which is no holds bar. And I think there's a happy medium to be found where we have some diplomacy and respect for one another.
And I think and the frustrating thing is, when I hear the dialogue today, it's almost as if the political correct card is a license to be able to say whatever the heck you want to say, and it's to degrade individuals' identity. And again, I think political correctness, when gone to the full extent, is awful. It's wrong. It keeps us from being able to disagree with one another, to be able to wrestle and discover the truth in order that we might be able to go towards a more prosperous direction. But political incorrectness is not rudeness. Political incorrectness keeps us from having these conversations, just like these rude comments keep us from having
And if for no other reason, so there's like the having a good character reason, right? Yeah. Just wanting to be a moral, Christ-like, kind person. That's should be the number one reason. But even if it's not, right, we don't need to be giving the left any more ammo against us than we already have, because they paint us, the media paints us, you are either crazy or stupid. Those are the two things you are. Every Republican you can think of who is in the mainstream media is either crazy or stupid or both. And so we need to stop giving them that ammo and rise above. And I think it would be really refreshing, especially to younger voters. It would help voters come out and feel like they're voting for something and not necessarily in spite of something.
We need a Reagan. We need somebody. We need a Reagan. We need even from the left side. You need a Bill Clinton, even though his character was rough. But I mean, you had someone that was inspiring, that treated the other person, at least Bill Clinton in the public arena, treated people with civility and respect. And we just have George H.W. Bush treated people with respect and dignity. We just don't have that anymore, Kerby.
We don't seem to. And you went to a presentation by Jonah Goldberg, and when you were talking about tribalism, I was thinking about his new book, because in some respects, this is a newer phenomenon. There has been tribalism throughout human history. Okay, I get that. So I'm not saying that it's new in that sense, but the way in which it is so dominated and politicized our culture, that's one of the things Jonah Goldberg is talking about, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one of the fascinating things he says. It kind of builds upon Neil Postman, Amusing Ourselves to Death, his argument that we've kind of intermersed information and entertainment. So now, in order for information to be conveyed to us, it has to be entertaining before us. And so that's why you see massive tragedy, but up next, puppies. Right? Like, it keeps us going. And so it's Postman's argument has always been, it's not that we've ever lived in a world where there's no entertainment. It's now the news in and of itself is entertainment. And then when you move into the tribalistic argument, now it's no longer individuals that are just simply arguing about ideas, but rather this is a video game that we're living in now, that individuals, this is another side to be defeated, right? Hence the reason why there's the heated rhetoric that one would expect on Twitter just because of the anonymity and you're just looking at a computer screen. Well, now it leads to comments that are coming out in real life. Well, he's going to die anyway, right? Or the comments that Michelle Wolf would say at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. We're treating each other like we're just entertaining video games or like we're avatars online, which is, for a Christian, we should be aghast at, because you're not treating people with the dignity and respect from the image of God that they bear.
Here is a way that you can start an argument and immediately be criticized, and that is to say, my opponent has a good point at that. The moment you say that, it just comes in. There was a time not so long ago when we had Ted Koppel, who, when he would be moderating some of these debates, say, well, another good argument is, or he made a good point. How would you respond to that? Try that today on MSNBC or CNN. Try that on Fox News, because you're not allowed to even acknowledge that your opponent has a good argument and to actually say, okay, I will concede that argument because I think that's a good one. You never hear that anymore because everything is politicized. Everything's part of the tribe. And the moment you deviate a little bit off the tribe or the plantation, whatever metaphor you want to use, you get criticized.
And we even saw this in 2016, 2017, like the idea of being any type of critical towards President Trump right now. Like, to show criticism towards the president is to say that you don't support the president. Well, coming from a Christian understanding, faithful are the wounds of a friend, right? Like, I want to be able to support, I want to be able to champion, I want to celebrate the good that's done. But if you can't call out what's bad, then what kind of friend are you? Because there's a way that seems right to man but ends in destruction. If we're the captain of our own souls and directing that, we need other people to speak into it.
Well, I think, I'll differ from you a little bit here in the sense that he gets a lot of criticism. And I think that's where we get frustrated on the right is, we get it. We get it that there are, fallacies here like anyone other human has, right? So getting slammed, he's had enough of it, but that doesn't mean internally we can't be intellectually honest here about some things and in our discussions with each other, like we are here. But I get that people don't really want to slam him anymore publicly. He gets it.
Yeah, he does get a lot. And we're going to have to take a break, but I think that brings up a good point. I was at a meeting last week, and, there's a sense that he's just overwhelmingly negative coverage towards him.
Yes, and he really has done a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, he really is making moves and delivering on promises that he campaigned on.
Mm-hmm.
And so wishing that was more of the forefront of the dialogue and the coverage. I think that would really alleviate some of this.
And what's a really important distinction that has to be made, especially in this Twitter world, is just because someone doesn't correct them publicly doesn't mean they haven't corrected them.
Yeah.
Just because the criticism hasn't come publicly doesn't mean they haven't privately gone to that individual, which we're going to talk more about this in the upcoming 2018 midterm elections. We'll be figuring out whether it says Yanni or Laurel and all sorts of stuff when we come back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I've recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View for this third hour. If you've been watching online, because we've been in Dallas since 12 to 2, and now there's some of you that are watching for your third hour online. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on this Wednesday, May 16, 2018 day. We have been talking about a variety of issues today. We've been talking about everything from the North Korean summit being threatened because of some provocations relative to South Korea and the whole idea of denuclearization. We'll get to that during this hour. We've been talking about young conservatives as well as relating to older conservatives, and then the midterm elections in 2018. But probably the biggest issue that is dividing the United States of America right now revolves around Laurel. You're thinking to yourself right now, what does Laurel have to do with anything? I got the text message yesterday morning when there was only around 200 people that had retweeted this sound clip that has divided America right now. And last count, it's upwards of 20,000 retweets right now of this Laurel and Yanni. So to give you a little bit of background, there is a audio clip right now that circulated and that went viral through Reddit as well as Twitter and on various other social media outlets. It's a 4-second clip, and some people are claiming to hear Laurel. Other people are claiming to hear Yanni. But I think that just indicates that they are so enamored with the 1980s musical artist Yanni that they're hearing that.
Hey, I grew up on Yanni. I've got nothing against Yanni.
Okay.
But they're wrong.
You probably love Kenny G too, but that's neither here nor there, Paula Abdul. And so we are going to play this clip for you, and then I just need you to know that if you actually hear anything, it should be Laurel. But nevertheless, let's play the clip, Andrew.
Laurel. 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 Laurel.
It seems so clear. It says Laurel. I don't know how anybody in this world can hear Yanni. Do you hear Yanni from that?
I hear a clear Laurel.
You hear a clear Laurel. Do you hear? Okay, Kerby.
I hear Laurel on this one, but
Okay.
I've heard some people on our website say that when they hear it on their phone, they hear it differently. But right now, the one from the New York Times, when you're playing, it does sound like Laurel. But if you play it, and they have a place where where you remove the bass or something like that, and then you can hear something different. But again, it depends on which particular octaves you hear and whether the sampling rate's that, I suspect. But I hear nothing but Laurel, just like you guys right now.
Okay, so this is where Kerby, as Kerby alluded to in his comments, he had somehow, some way adhered to these alternative facts, we'll just go ahead and say, when he said he heard Yanni. But nevertheless, it says...
Not this right now.
Not this. It says Laurel very clearly.
Very clearly.
But I think this illuminates one of the things that I think I've really pointed to, especially during the first hour that we were on, Chelsey, is the sense that it's just kind of refreshing to be talking about something outside of Washington, D.C. I feel like that's been the drastic, significant coverage that's ever come out of any outlets for the past almost 2 years now. Is all we've been talking about is the election or what's happening in D.C. or President Trump. We haven't been able to talk about anything else.
Right. Or as I like to say, this is my outlet for the Royals and looking forward to the royal wedding on Saturday. It's just refreshing to have something positive and fun and sweet to look forward to. Or in this case, to tell Kerby, that you're hearing it wrong on your phone.
Exactly.
Wait till we open up the phones here. You're going to have some of them say, Nick, I don't hear Laurel. I only hear Yanni. But the way it is right now, I think everybody hears Laurel.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and do this.
Constrained it.
Because Kirby's asked, we're going to go ahead and open the phone lines. 800-351-1212.
They can talk about North Korea and talk about the elections, but they also have to tell us what they hear if they heard it.
Yeah, 800-351-1212. We're going to be talking about the elections or what you heard, Laurel or Yanni, or you can put something on Facebook, facebook.com.
Oh, here they come on Facebook. I'm starting to see
radio.
Now. Here we
Did
go.
you hear Laurel? Did you hear Yanni? And then Maria, clever, is Yanni saying Laurel? I thought I heard a flute in the background as well.
There you go.
But nevertheless,
Maria.
I don't get it.
But it's just fun. I mean, one, I can get passionate about it because it really does. It's just a sense that we can disagree. And there's the passions and Kirby's fake news whenever he says that it's Yanni. But nevertheless, but it is kind
and
of
the lack of civility that comes from the host.
Oh, I know. What can I say? I'm a hypocrite.
Yeah, no.
So, but it really does. It's just kind of refreshing to be able to talk about something other than politics and to recognize, even from a conservative perspective, which has been kind of the interesting thing about how individuals have overemphasized, especially if you're from a conservative side, you've overemphasized politics based on your reaction. And a key part of conservatism is the understanding that politics isn't everything. That's what Edmund Burke was so clever to point out relative to the permanence of things. And so it's important for us to understand that at the end of the day, there's more important things than what's happening in Washington, namely what's happening in your neighborhood, what's happening in your community associations, what's happening in your family life. There's just a number of things that's happening right now.
Well, again, is the dress gold and blue, or is it black and blue, or is it gold?
See, I didn't understand. And this
the
is where
dress is gold and white.
So, Chelsey, I don't understand this because you seem so right. It's so right.
I am
2
all the
minutes,
time,
2
really.
minutes ago, and now you're fake news. You're the establishment. We need to drain
Let me
the
get you
swamp
the
in here.
colorblind glasses.
No way. I can see clearly now. The rain is gone. As what's his name? What's his name? I don't even remember the artist. I think it was Nash or something like that. But nevertheless,
it wasn't Yanni.
It wasn't Yanni. It was the dress, which happened 3 years ago, which is shocking. Can you imagine? That happened 3 years ago.
I love these. I'm dying to know the explanation.
Yeah.
Like, what is the reason behind?
I don't know the explanation behind the audio. Some people have sent me a couple of links relative to this is the master copy or this is the breakdown, but all I hear is more Laurel. Even when people have manipulated it to only hear Yanni, apparently, but I don't hear Yanni because I have ears to hear and eyes to see that which the Lord has put before me, and the Lord has put Laurel.
You know what? Somehow this is going to come back to it's because we're millennials. That's what this is going to be all our fault.
Yeah, I feel really good about that. So what we'll be doing is we're going to have to take a little break here in a little bit. Oh, and what do we have? We have Laura that has come on and said that she heard Laurel. I missed exactly what it means. Well, it kind of is, it birthed out of really a Reddit, an individual uploaded on the website Reddit, this audio file. And apparently the audio file, depending upon how you hear it, how it falls in your ears or whatever, something along those lines. Some people are hearing Laurel, some people are hearing Yanni. Well, what started out on just this on the website Reddit has now since gone viral to the extent that the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, USA Today all had features on their front page this morning about this Laurel and Yanni, and it kind of gives reference to what was happening 3 years ago with the dress, that infamous dress that was the picture that went viral. That some people said that it was white and gold, which were just mistaken people that really just needed to see a doctor immediately if you still hold to that, not pointing.
You've been proven wrong on this. I would back off. You've been proven wrong.
Those of us that remember Backstreet Boys and the black and blue, and the black and blue dress is what they saw. But so nevertheless, it just is very reminiscent of that. Of just how these small little things can have, or what Jonah Bircher would say, has an emotional resonance within us that causes it to go viral as well. And so we won't talk about Laurel and Yanni anymore. We'll shift the conversation back to the need for civility after the break. And we'll also be talking about North Korea, the summit specifically. And so when we come back, we'll talk about civility, North Korea summit, and we'll also be taking your phone calls, 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. Or leave a question on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Stephen Moore, economist with the Heritage Foundation, wrote an op-ed with the intriguing title, Goodbye OPEC. He argued that America was not only on the way to becoming energy independent, but also headed towards becoming energy dominant. What a change this is from a few decades ago. I grew up with environmentalists warning us that we were running out of food and energy. They were predicting future famines and a major energy crisis. It was nearly impossible to imagine any way this country would be on its way to energy independence. Stephen Moore was on my radio program to explain this remarkable turnaround. Much of it is due to the American oil shale boom, which has significantly changed drilling operations in the Permian Basin in Texas and the Bakken Shale in North Dakota. As America gets closer to becoming a net exporter of oil, that will have a positive effect on reducing our trade deficit. Obviously, Saudi Arabia is still a player in the oil business, but most of OPEC is fading away. Oil is now listed at $70 a barrel. As price increases, this can help the economy. Of course, politics is another reason why America is moving towards energy independence and even energy dominance. The previous president wanted to restrict oil exploration and fossil fuel development. The current president has a different attitude. Some have called the oil shale boom Donald Trump's revenge. The president has been willing to free up lands in places like Alaska and has allowed permits for new pipelines. All of these changes in energy policy and energy production are reasons that it may finally be time to say goodbye to OPEC. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View Radio. I am Nick Pitts, your host for today, this Millennial Roundtable on Wednesday, May 16, 2018. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute, as well as Kerby Anderson. And we have been talking about the, not the dress, I guess the audio file that says Laurel and Yanny, as well as some of the North Korea situation and the need for civility now. And so we're going to take some of these questions and comments that have been put on Laura on Facebook, and you can leave a comment or question on Facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Civility in this country is an all-time low. As a nurse, it's unreal what students expect. And then it just talks about the uncivility and just the basic rudeness. There's an individual that I'm related to that I used to beat up when I was a little kid and showed no civility. Namely, my little brother has decided that he is going to comment. And so, but I should say that even though I beat him up when he was younger, there came a point when he started beating me up. But nevertheless, we'll just jump to his question because this is something we go back and forth, and I'm going to be really interested in y'all's perspective. He says, what do y'all think it would take to bring us to a more civilized debate and more cooperation? The media, Congress, individuals debating view the other side with so much animosity. Can one person bring everyone to the table again other than Christ? And so I would be very interested to hear, Chelsey, what you would think. Do you think that there's a way that we might be able to move forward to move into a more civilized debate? Or is this just the trajectory where we're going to be moving?
Oh, we spoke a little bit about this earlier where we said for 8 years, you know, the right had been shunned to the corners. If you ever expressed an opinion that was different than the Obama's agenda or liberal agenda, you were a bigot. I mean, you were labeled these names. And so for 8 years, there was just an immense amount of really oppression of speech and thought and ideas in the marketplace. And then we talk about how we're swinging the other way now. And it's, everything's very politically incorrect. It's no holds bar in the media, really on either side of the debate. So I hope we reach an equilibrium, and I hope that we come to a place where I think it's so important to have these discussions to get to truth, and to be able to debate and talk about these issues in an intellectual way that really sheds light on our own weaknesses of our side, but also our own strengths on our side. I think that type of dialogue is really important.
One of the things that you start seeing as a change, and I'm going to mention a couple of individuals that have nothing in common but have everything in common. Sam Harris, this new atheist. We just mentioned Ben Shapiro just a few minutes ago. And then, of course, I mentioned Jordan before because of some of the things that he's writing about right now. These are individuals from Jewish to atheist, but they're all starting to challenge political correctness, and they are gaining phenomenal kinds of responses in different sectors. Some are atheists, some are kind of new agey a little bit, others are, Ben Shapiro's Jewish, but I think there is just a sense in which they're becoming popular because they're willing to stand up and challenge some of the political correctness out there. Of course, that was something that was part of the political campaign of Ben Carson. Certainly was a part of the political campaign of Donald Trump. So maybe there's a hope in the future that people are going to say, common sense needs to reign. We just can't continue down this road.
Yeah, I think I'm of the mind that it's going to just have to take courageous individuals at the end of the day. I don't think it comes. There's two ways that I've seen it come in the past. It's come through tragedy. One, tragedy typically tends to bring us together, not necessarily that we all agree about the same thing. But I think about what happened with 9/11, where the partisanship kind of fell down, and we really were able to talk to each other with some dignity and some respect. We saw that with Steve Scalise as well, as just happened recently. Again, but I hate to think that it has to take a tragedy and people have to be hurt or lives have to be lost to bring civility back to the table.
I don't think it has to go there. I think that if we're talking about in a political realm, especially believers, our hope is not in the government, right? Our answer is not politics. And our answer, we have something higher than ideology. We have our faith. And so understanding that those concepts are important and are informed by our faith, but ultimately they're not our identity. The left can't necessarily say the same unless they are, faith-based individuals. I think that the left finds an immense amount of identity and satisfaction in politics. They look to the government to provide a lot of answers, even in a social context. But beyond that, I think it's remembering where our identity is, and that therefore others' arguments, like they're sticks and stones, right? They just, it doesn't matter. But ultimately it takes a candidate rising to the top and saying, I will not engage in this type of dialogue. So I will not sling mud. I will not pay for the ad, and running a different type of campaign. It's just, that's what it's going to take, is someone refusing to engage.
I think it's going to take somebody that has to have either one, and I hope it just doesn't have to be a rich person, because I think a lot of the times a lot of the money flows to the people that are willing to sling mud, and that's what they pay for, slinging mud in order that you can, because at the end of the day, the ends justify the means, and so slinging mud kind of negative gets you to where you want to be, positive, which is actually elected, or two, just a person with an immense amount of courage. Someone that's willing to stand up and is willing to turn the other cheek, be gracious, but also be strong and stand the truth, and continue to speak gracious truth and refuse to go down that side. Which again, I think is going to take a significant amount, like that. And I'll just show my cards here. I was a pretty big fan of Marco Rubio during the primary, and I can't tell you how broken it made me when he did that. When he went down the mud trail, and he went the juvenile route.
Yeah, and it didn't even fit him well.
No, and it didn't fit him well. And so you think, well, what would it look like for a person to continue to have been steadfast during that time and refuse to go into the name calling, which is just childish? I don't care what side of the aisle on it. It's just childish to call somebody by names, challenge their ideas, to not just preach the truth, but also be about the truth. But more
than that, it would take the base, it would take, the supporters of that person to say, I don't view that as weakness. I don't view that as refusing to answer the hard questions. It would take the base supporting that type of dialogue.
This is where I would go back and say, then it's a redefinition of who the base is then. And we've seen this in the past two presidents. President Trump has redefined what the base was. He redefined the kind of the partitions of the base by saying, I'm going to double down on individuals and draw out certain segments of that base that typically are performing much higher than what they have in the past. Barack Obama did that when he went down and he doubled down on certain constituencies relative to the base. And so I think it's just a redefinition of the base. And I got to believe it to be true. I pray and hope to God that it's true, that there's people that still believe that you can be right, you can stand for truth, but you don't have to sacrifice your morals and your character for that truth. Because then what is that teaching another generation? But then two, what does it take what does it profit a man if he loses his soul and gains the whole world, right?
Right. I think I wouldn't view this just subset of history that we're in, this tiny microcosm that we're in, as a reflection of the whole, right? I think that the Trump phenomenon really caught a lot of people off guard because so many factors led into us getting here. And so I don't think we're here forever. I think the right has been beat up for years. They're sick of it. They're tired of it. They've been called labels and names. They've been, when they try to speak their truth, we didn't fight truth with truth. We fought truth with name calling. And so I think that he's really a result of a lot of that. And there's going to be a day where conservatives feel like they have their voice again. They're standing on solid ground again. And then hopefully we'll all be better for it. And we'll all learn a lot of lessons along the way.
And I just wonder what type of voice it's going to be, right? Which is, I think it's just going to be, especially from a conservative perspective, I just wonder what kind of voice it's going to be because, again, I'll just take a phone call right now. I'm not going to complete that thought. So we've got Jules in Texas right now. Jules, are you there?
Yes.
Hey, Jules, what is your point of view?
Well, you mentioned character, and I don't think that anyone has demonstrated more character in public service since Ronald Reagan than Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz took merciless beating from Mitch McConnell, and he stood in the Senate and called him out with facts, extremely civil, but totally accurate about how the deep state, the entrenched society has been working. Barack Obama called him out overseas, and Ted showed up in New York City and said, I'm right here. I mean, if you want to call me out, here I am. It's one of those, it's not a barbershop. You don't have to take a number and get in line. I'm ready anywhere. And even when the current president, Donald Trump, lied unmercifully about him, he still held honor above and said, he's the nominee, I will support him. Just the classiest move since Ronald Reagan.
Well, Jules, thank you so much for that comment. Ted Cruz is someone that's local here. We're based out of Dallas, and so he's up for re-election right now. And so it will be interesting to see how that plays out, especially since some of his recent overtures of going so far as to supporting President Trump in the 2020 election and what that looks like in 2018 for him as well. But we've got to take a break, and then when we come back from break, we'll continue to talk about civility as well as this kind of the North Korea situation, and then we'll talk about some religious liberty as well. And we'll be back right after this.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school, until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, we came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture. Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-8800. 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. And pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
Yuri, 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 Yuri.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, joined in studio today by Kerby Anderson as well as Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. And during the first half hour of this hour, we were talking about the role of civility in our society today, and the need for civility when debating individuals and certain issues, that you can agree with the person or disagree with the person, but you don't have to demonize the person, and how it seems as though we're living and moving in a world in which we're lacking character, but also living and moving in a world where there's just a simple, it's not just disagreeing anymore, but you have to demonize the other person anymore. And even the founders, if we stretch all the way back 200 years ago, one of the clauses that they gave us in the Constitution and our founding documents is this idea of the freedom of religion, of this idea to be able to operate and to hold our beliefs. And one of the things that they saw about the benefit of having religion into society is that religion tended to produce virtue in individuals, and virtue is a good ally of government. When you have virtuous people, they're doing and performing certain services that the government doesn't have to do. Some of those services include feeding the homeless. Some of those services, if you have religious people, mean that they're typically, if they're virtuous people, that they're not stealing. So that means you don't have to have as many police officers. So religious people that have virtue inside of them are typically a help to government. And one of the things that, again, it's the fourth article that we've got listed on the Point of View website, is the religious liberty and the adoption piece, and how some of that is starting to come up as well. And is definitely something that's needed, because scope and scale wise, there are around 147 million orphans here in the world today, and there's a need for individuals, especially from a Christian standpoint, to heed what it says in James 1:27, that religion that's pure and undefiled and pleasing to the Father is this, to visit the orphan and the widow, and to remain unstained by the world. So Chelsey, take us away. What's hot on the news relative to religious liberty and adoption?
Sure. Well, I was really excited to see that we were going to discuss this article today, because the Texas actually passed the last legislative session, the Child Welfare Inclusion Act, which is very similar to the ones we're talking about today, which Oklahoma and Kansas both adopted adoption bills, or child placement agency bills. Mm-hmm. So that includes foster care organizations. It protects their right to religious liberty in a broad sense, which means their right to place children in homes with like-minded believers. Baptist adoption agencies can place with Baptist families. Catholic can place with Catholic. Placing in the home of, a married man and woman as wife, as opposed to single, unmarried, or same-sex married homes. And then even in the Texas bill, the Texas Child Welfare Inclusion Act, it included a provision that allowed foster care or adoption parents themselves to not have to provide abort-efficient drugs, contraception, or abortions to those they're fostering. And so it really protects a whole host of conscience rights for people who want to engage in this field. It's such a huge need that needs to be met. People who are leaning into that need, proactively doing something about it, but really don't want to withstand legal litigation and liability for operating in accordance with their beliefs. And so I think these bills are huge to continue to just provide protections and enable people into this space who are called to be in this space without fear of liability. And we saw that a lot, in the Texas legislature, especially. Catholic Charities even testified. They said, we closed down all child placements in the city of San Antonio, Texas, not because there wasn't a need there. There's a huge need in San Antonio, but because we were threatened with lawsuits, and we couldn't afford to withstand. We're nonprofit, donor dollar based. We couldn't afford to withstand that type of liability with all the law San Antonio was passing on SOGI issues. So with that said, we call this the Inclusion Act because it really allows for a diverse field. It allows for, it doesn't really limit the field in terms of allowing any other secular entities who want to adopt or place children in homes with families. They can still be there. There's still options available, but it really just protects this subset who have really faced a lot of litigation in the last few years.
So it really isn't limiting, because I think one side of the perspective would say, well, there's plenty of orphans, and there needs to be more families, because we all believe it to be true that it's better for them to be placed in families than for them to exist in the system. I think we can all believe that to be true. And so what this is doing is it's just opening up the opportunity for Christians to be allow them to be almost conduits through which these orphan children are connected with families, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, we called it the Inclusion Act because that's what it does. It essentially says we want diversity in our child placement systems. We don't want a one-size-fits-all, and the more the merrier. And in order to do that, we're going to have to make some legal protections available, especially with the rise of litigation when it relates to same-sex marriage and other things. So really, anyone who's out there and wants to adopt a child or have a foster care child placed with them, you can go do that. You can go to any type, whether you're Buddhist, Muslim, atheist, or Christian, and find an adoption agency or foster care agency that will place a child with you. And this just continues to allow that to be an open field.
I think that's one of the fascinating things. One, we just need more individuals in this, because I think the biblical narrative is very clear relative to what we should be doing with adoption. And Chelsey, I don't know about you, if your friends, it seems as though the millennial generation is just captivated by this idea of adoption, of just the idea of really, especially from a religious standpoint, it is a living embodiment and illustration, a vivid illustration of what God has done with us, that though we were apart from him, he chose us and has decided to love us and adopt us into his family, even though we bear his image, but his likeness. And it's just a beautiful picture of the unending love of Jesus really being put on full display here in the real world.
That's absolutely right. I know so many of my peers have started fostering or adopting children, and I don't know if the need is bigger maybe than it used to be. If some of the children in foster agencies, there's more now than ever, I think, in the state of Texas. And so being involved in a church that really supports children and orphans out there and ways to help them find families and be loved and be served, I do think it's something that's important right now for everyone to be involved in.
And I mean, Kerby, you think about it from a pro-life perspective too, right? Like one of the things that kind of the conservative and Christians have really championed is just being pro-life. And one of the continual talking points is it's not just in the womb, but it's also to the tomb, of wanting to care for those children. And what not a better way than considering adoption or considering agencies and organizations that are really giving their voice to support this kind of work.
And again, if you look at a lot of the adoption agencies, a lot of them are tied into some kind of pro-life work, and recognize that if indeed you're going to have all these pregnancy resource centers out here, which are going to encourage women who have what they feel is a crisis pregnancy to consider keeping the child or putting the child up for adoption, that's going to increase the number out there to be adopted. So that's a key point. But I'd love to get Chelsey to speak to the issue of why this particular piece of legislation. For our listeners in Oklahoma, it was Senate Bill 1140. And I go back to what happened even before same-sex marriage was legalized, because it was actually legalized, if you will, in the first state of Massachusetts. I just had a governor who's running for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as governor, and when they immediately, under Mitt Romney, who was the governor at that time, legalized same-sex marriage, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, the first question was, then, since we now have people that can get married who are of the same sex, can we not and should we not force every adoption agency to actually require that they not only put children up for adoption in traditional homes, but in same-sex homes? Well, that question came up, and it was resolved very quickly. They told the Catholic Charities that even though you cannot, in good conscience, actually put a child up for adoption in a same-sex home, and you refer to others, that's not enough to consider. And so, as a result, one of the things that we've got to actually begin to think about is how we would actually resolve that issue. And so they actually closed down Catholic Charities for 100 years. Interesting, they'd been around for 100 years. And so we began to see that this is going to begin to cycle through, that other particular faith-based adoption agencies, if they were not protected, Chelsey, would be actually required to place children in homes where they would disagree with it from a theological point of view.
Right. I think that's such a great example to bring out of why the need is there. As Nick, you hit on this earlier, and I think what we're having to define what the First Amendment terms, the free exercise of religion. And I think that it's really been minimized over the last few years, decade even, just to become the freedom to worship. You can pray in your church, you can pray in your home, talk about it with other Christians at Bible study. But when you come into the public sphere, you have to abandon your faith. You're not allowed to bring it into politics, most certainly. And they're supposed to be really separate arenas of your life. And we know as believers that nothing could be further from the truth. Everything we do and operate is based out of our faith. The way we take it with us to work, we take it with us to school, the way we speak, hopefully, all of that is informed by our faith. And so really, when you're looking at these adoption agencies, they're here trying to serve the community because of that same faith. And it's an act of worship to God and to care for others and really abide by their callings. And I think we have to start there with that definition of free exercise of religion to understand why it's important to protect these other aspects as well.
What would this world be like without a Mother Teresa, right? If we're trying to relegate Mother Teresa out of the American experiment. So we're going to have to take a commercial break, but we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The state of Florida has a new law on religious liberty. The Florida Student and School Personnel Religious Liberties Act codifies much of the case law protecting religious expression in public school. Under the new law, schools are instructed to treat voluntary student religious expression in the same way as other viewpoints being expressed. Students are given the backing of the state in their manner of religious dress, and groups of students are given the space to form student religious clubs and gather to pray like any other club. School employees benefit under the law as well. The new law expressly states, quote, employees may not be prevented from participating in religious activities on school grounds that are initiated by students at reasonable times prior to or after the school day, unquote. Finally, the law requires the Florida Department of Education to develop a model policy establishing a limited public forum at certain times for the voluntary expression of religious viewpoints by students and personnel. This provision, which is required to be adopted by each school district throughout the state, will undoubtedly provide direction for how to handle things like graduation speeches, school board meetings, and maybe even ahead of athletic contests. There's nothing earth-shattering in this new law, but whenever a state takes the time to codify what the courts have determined the First Amendment requires, it's a good thing for religious liberty. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts, and I am joined by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute and Kerby Anderson. And we've been talking about religious liberty here for the last little bit, and since we've got Chelsey Youman. Now, typically what I would say is that I'm kind of an aficionado when it comes to the law. I've watched Boston Legal a time or two. I practiced and honed my skills as a young child, arguing with my brother. And so I typically know how to do a little bit of law, but it's always good to have somebody come and help me out.
Happy to be here as a supplement to your knowledge, Nick.
What can I say? Me and Denny, we know how to do this thing. But it really is interesting because, again, what we were talking about before the break is just the need to be able to have the freedom to be able to exercise your religion. And, you know, we're just living in a very interesting world today where Christianity is seen as either bigoted, it's seen as discriminatory, and to a certain degree, there are examples of that. There are examples of individuals that are discriminatory and that are bigoted. The primary example that's often given is the Westboro Baptist Church, of just how kind of hateful that they are. But I think it's fair characterization to say that outliers do not characterize the majority. And I think any rational person would recognize that. There have always been the kind of outlandish outliers that typically try to characterize the majority. But at the end of the day, when you look at the holistic movement, the vast majority of Christians are really trying to do good. This stretches all the way back to the American founding. This stretches all the way back to civilized society, where instead of running away from the hurt and running away from the sickness and the plague, individuals are running to it and trying to be the hands and feet. Instead of during the first century, instead of just throwing children out onto the heaps, which would have been that type of form of abortion on the outskirts of the city, you had religious individuals and Christians running to the outside of the city skirts and adopting these children and taking them in as their own. That even though there are instances where there are outliers, the outliers cannot define the vast majority. I think that's, if we want to be fair with one another. Now, let's agree that there have been outliers, but they don't characterize the majority.
Well said. And again, the example you just used a minute ago, very well written in a book that is called, again, The Triumph of Christianity. Yep. Rodney Stark is a professor at Baylor and just talks time and time again about ministering to the least of these, which, again, apparently some of our secular friends don't know what that phrase means, but nevertheless. But coming back to Chelsey's point, here's an article here. It says, freedom of religion is not freedom to discriminate. That's the problem we are running into, Chelsey, and that is, we all lived in this world not so long ago of live and let live. We say, well, okay, you have a different view of religion than I do, and of course you have the freedom to actually use that and to act on those faith ideas. But today you're finding yourself, when you talk about religious liberty, people sort of look back at you like, well, that's the freedom to discriminate. And that's really one of the big challenges, I think, for you and for First Liberty here in the 21st century, don't you think?
That might be something I've heard before. It kind of rings a bell. No, absolutely. Just that religious liberty has almost become a dirty word in some circles, I think, and the media certainly portrayed it that way over the last few years. But really what this is about is creating space for diversified society that allows room for both to exist. And I always come back to this example because I think we have to make some really fine distinguishments here between the same-sex marriage question and the race question. Besides the fact that I could spend all day talking about how their histories are the same, including multiple constitutional amendments being passed to desegregate our country after hundreds of years of slavery. I mean, the histories are entirely different. But beyond that, really, there are millennia-old, sincerely held religious beliefs for everyone of the Abrahamic faith. So Christians, Jewish, and Muslims alike all have millennia-old beliefs pertaining to human sexuality. And they're sincere beliefs, and they're beliefs that warrant protection and should be allowed to flourish in our society. And this is very similar to, I think, the legal landscape we were in after Roe versus Wade. So in Obergefell, when the Supreme Court decided that same-sex marriage is a fundamental right, they specifically declined to decide that on equal protection terms, which means that they didn't make sexual orientation or gender identity a protected class specifically. So the Supreme Court refrained from equating LGBT issues with race and making a protected class, and instead said that this is a fundamental right, just like the right to abortion was a fundamental right in Roe versus Wade. The right to educate your children however you wish is a fundamental right. So what that means is after Roe versus Wade, we spent decades carving out conscience exemptions across our country for healthcare practitioners and providers, nurses, pharmacists, anyone who wanted to be exempted from forced, compelled participation in an abortion was given that exemption. And it allowed both the right to flourish and religious adherence to flourish. And I think we're in that same legal landscape today. There have to be protections carved out and exemptions carved out for religious adherents who have sincere beliefs on human sexuality.
Yeah, and again, Kerby, I want to hope and I want to believe that we're a big enough society that we can have differences and we can have beliefs and we can still have respect for one another. They shouldn't be mutually exclusive, right? It shouldn't be a zero-sum game that just because individuals don't have the same beliefs from one another that they can't live amongst each other. I'm very acquainted with that. Let's think about it from a sports analogy perspective, right? At the end of the day, you all are very wayward when it comes to following football teams. I am a huge Titans fan. I believe the Titans they're going to win the Super Bowl this year. But I can still sit across the table from you, even though that you're broken and you believe the Cowboys Cowboys have a good shot. It's not going to happen, but I'm going to be more sympathetic to you. And the same should be with religion, right? We should understand that there's some differences between us, but we can still live and move and exist among one another.
Again, that's kind of the live and let live. It used to be that we would have these partisan arguments about football or about whatever, and then we'd get together and laugh about all of that. And there was a time not so long ago when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill would argue with each other and then go out to dinner with one another. Mm-hmm. And so that part has been lost. And using sports as an illustration, because I oftentimes say that politics is downstream from culture. If you take it away from politics, have you watched the NBA Finals lately? I mean, again, there is usually the idea that we fight on the field, but then we shake hands at the end. And some of these guys look like they're going to hit each other. Yeah. And there have been flagrant fouls and everything else. So this isn't just a problem in politics. It's a problem where we aren't acting civilly towards one another. Sportsmanship, civility, those almost sound like words from the 19th century, and we need to come back to them pretty quick.
Yeah, we can't lose our soul simply for the sake of gaining the world, because then what have we really gained in the first place? And so, yeah, the NBA Finals, I think LeBron James just needs to go ahead and the Boston Celtics have his number. And so
I believe that is the case.
So I think, but here's my suggestion. Even though I guess I have to be a Mavs fan now. That's the one, because Tennessee didn't have a basketball team. And so I think LeBron James needs to go ahead and just join the Rockets. Okay. And so he joins the Rockets. Rockets become a super team, and then you've got the Warriors that are a super team, and then they just fight. Yeah. I think that's the only way there's going to be parity in the NBA anymore, because at the end of the day, and man, the freaking Warriors look so strong. I mean, it's theirs to lose, but nevertheless, that's a whole different story. So we're at the end of the show right now, and so we are so grateful that you decided to tune in. Chelsey, so good to see you again.
Isn't it great to have her?
Always so good to see you
as
again.
always.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
And so as we're saying goodbyes, Andrew, could we cue up one more time the people? Just say Yanni and Laurel. Can we hear it one more time? And so, Kerby, this is going to be the last time that you have the chance to be able to hear Laurel. Okay.
Well, I hear Laurel.
Let's just go ahead and acknowledge.
You manipulated it.
Fake news, Kerby. Let's Andrew hit the tape. Hit the tape.
Laurel.
I mean, it's clear as day.
Yeah.
Laurel.
Clear as day.
It is. It's
Laurel.
clear
We've
on
got
that
Laurel.
one.
Everybody
Laurel.
quit being fake news.
We
Yanni
can go home
lovers.
now. We can go home now.
If you want to listen to Yanni, that's great. Go listen to Yanni. Enjoy the musical stylings of Yanni. Let's just acknowledge that it's Laurel. The country needs to be united again. Let's all come together. And so thank you so much for tuning in to Point of View. You can check out more information on pointofview.net. And I will see you here again tomorrow morning.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.